is a statement of faith, isn't it? My help is in the name of the Lord. He is my keeper. He will keep me. He never sleeps. He always watches over me. We are going to study the 8th commandment this morning, so turn in your Bibles to Exodus chapter 20, verse 15. The 8th commandment. It's a very simple commandment, and it's a very beautiful commandment. All God's commandments are beautiful, and I trust this morning you'll see that this one is especially beautiful. You shall not steal. So that's a beautiful commandment. Let's look in our forms booklets, the Forms and Prayers. Turn to page 249. Page 249 in the back of the booklet, the Heidelberg Catechism, Lord's Day 42. We have question 110. What does God forbid in the 8th commandment? He forbids not only outright theft and robbery, which governing authorities punish, but in God's sight, theft also includes all evil tricks and schemes designed to get our neighbor's goods for ourselves, whether by force or means that appear legitimate, such as inaccurate measurements of weight, size, or volume, fraudulent merchandising, counterfeit money, excessive interest, or any other means forbidden by God. In addition, God forbids all greed and pointless squandering of his gifts. Question 111, what does God require of you in this commandment? That I do whatever I can and may for my neighbor's good, that I treat others as I would like them to treat me, and that I work faithfully so that I may help the needy in their hardship. All right. If you would like to take notes, you can see in your bulletin there is a page where you can fill in some blanks also. All right, little bit of overview before we get into the first point, what the commandment reveals about God. You shall not steal. Remember that we looked at God's law is divided into two tables. The first table is our relationship to God, and the second is our relationship to our neighbor, to each other. When God gives the law, what he's doing is he's establishing the parameters of a relationship. I think sometimes we struggle to say, how is it possible to love God's law? Well, if you understand the intent and design of the law, you'll see that we indeed should love it. Why not? In the first commandment, God says, don't follow other gods that are dead idols. They can't speak. They can't save you. They can't love you. But follow me. I'm the true God. In the second commandment, he says, don't worship me by your own imagination, but here's how you should worship me. And so God invites us to enjoy him in worship and a relationship. And the third commandment, God says, I give you my name. And especially back then, when you give a person your name, you give them yourself. You give them access. So God says, don't take my name in vain. My name is Yahweh. He's saying, I want to have a relationship with you. In the fourth commandment, God says, let's be together. Take the Sabbath day and make it holy. Let's be together and let's spend time with one another. So in the first table of the law, God is saying, I want to have a relationship with the people that I made. And here's how that relationship's going to take shape. And the same thing holds true for the second table of the law. The commandments that God gives us are designed to facilitate relationship with one another, relationships that are safe, relationships that are healthy, relationships that bless each other. We're not going to have a good relationship if I go and kill you, right? So don't murder one another, not only with deeds, but also with your words and your thoughts. We're not going to have a good relationship if we're committing adultery with each other's spouses, right? So God here in the second table devises the parameters for healthy, vibrant relationships in community with one another, not just with believers, but with our neighbors. And we're going to see that same principle in the 8th commandment, which is you shall not steal. Commandment is very brief, as the 6th and the 7th, consisting of only 2 words in the Hebrew. And it's very simple and straightforward, very crisp. don't steal. What we look at in the 8th commandment is a much broader category than simply theft. What we're dealing with here is the biblical acquisition of wealth, the biblical possession of wealth, and the use of wealth. And so just as we look at the parameters of where we've been before, we value and respect the authority structures that God has established for a safe and prosperous society. Honor your father and your mother, your teacher, so on and so forth. Law enforcement, all the different layers of authority. So we respect that. And then the 6th commandment, we respect each other's life, each other's spouses, and now here each other's possessions, their property. So that's, again, just by way of background, and as we're looking at this commandment, it's a beautiful commandment that forbids the destruction of a man's livelihood, and it encourages and excites productive and beneficial labor, the biblical acquisition, possession, and use of wealth. You shall not steal. All right, that was my overview. Now, to point 1, we've said that every commandment reveals God. Reveals something beautiful about God. That's why we can say these commandments are beautiful. What does this commandment, you shall not steal, what is God saying about himself when he gives this commandment? Well, he's saying a number of things. He's saying that he values not only human life, 6th commandment, you shall not murder, not only marriage, you shall not commit adultery, but he values stuff, property, possessions, and a man's labor. That's important to God. He cares about those things. He cares about the material world. He cares about the work which it takes to make this world a prosperous and beautiful place. So this commandment reveals, I have 4 bullet points. First of all, he made this world. God cares about material things. He made the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It also reveals that he owns this world. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those that dwell therein. Abraham Kuyper is famous to have said, there is not one square inch of creation over which Jesus does not say mine. It's all the Lord's. One of the reasons why the children of Israel were sent into captivity for 70 years was so that the land of Canaan could enjoy its Sabbaths. Every 7 years, they had to give rest to the land. They weren't allowed to plant. Every 7 years, the land needed to have its Sabbath. And so Israel wasn't doing that. What do we see going on there? God is saying, the promised land is my land, and because you mistreated my land, I'm taking it back, and you're going off into captivity so you can learn your lesson. So God owns this world. Here's the 3rd bullet point. He cares for this world. God loves and cares for the planet that he made. He made the world in 6 days, and he stood back, and he was ecstatic. So this is very good. It's very wonderful. It's beautiful. I'll read a couple verses from Psalm 104. Psalm 104 is a psalm about creation. And I will just jump in at verse 10. You make springs gush forth in the valleys. They flow between the hills. They give drink to every beast of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. Beside them the birds of the heavens dwell. They sing among the branches. From your lofty abode you water the mountains. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of your work. You cause the grass to grow for the livestock and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth, and wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart. It just goes on about God's wonderful care for creation as we look through these verses. Verse 24 then says, O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom have you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Isn't that beautiful? From the snake that slithers through the grass the butterfly that lands on the flower, to the deer that runs through the forest, to a mountain goat on the tops of the mountains, and the whale that swims in the sea. These are your creatures. You have made them all. You take care of them. The sixth commandment deals with the biblical acquisition of wealth. And God here says, I have acquired this. I have made this, and I care about it. What's a fascinating story is the story of Jonah. Remember Jonah? Oh, he's the most grumpy of all prophets. And in the end of the story, when God just caused that beautiful vine to just wither overnight, he's still grumbling. And God says, don't I have a right to take care of this city and to show it mercy? He says, the last verse in the book of Jonah, he says, there's 120,000 people in the city, and there's a lot of cows. That's the last word in the book of Jonah. God said, I care about those cows. I don't want them to die either. Amazing. God's common grace is his care for this planet and all its creatures. He causes the sun to shine, the clouds to rain upon the just and the unjust. You see, God is not a Gnostic. In the 4th century, there was a heresy that ran rampant through the church. And the Gnostic heresy was that the body doesn't matter. In fact, it said the body is sinful. The body is a prison, imprisoning your soul. And what you need to do is to let that soul be free from your body. God is not a Gnostic. God became a man. That should tell you from the start how much God loves the stuff that he made, the lengths to which he would go to reclaim it. He cares for this world and all the physicality and materialism of it. He also he works and values labor. So we read in Psalm 104 how God continues to water the mountains. He continues to cause the grass to grow. He does all these things. The trees of the Lord are abundantly watered. So God works. What did Jesus say when the Pharisees criticized him for working on the Sabbath and healing a man who was paralyzed? Jesus said to them, my Father is working until now, and I am working. The biblical acquisition of wealth, the biblical maintenance of wealth, property, possessions. So we see in the 6th commandment, or the 8th commandment, God reveals that he made this world and he cares for it. He owns it and he continues to work. God is the hardest working being in the universe. What is forbidden in this commandment? Well, as the commandment says it so explicitly, do not steal. That's the easy answer. What is stealing? What is theft? It is taking something from someone without their knowledge or consent. That's what it means to steal. But there are a whole bunch of sins that fall underneath this category of stealing. Our answer 110 gives us a whole bunch of them, such as evil tricks and schemes designed to get our neighbors good for ourselves, whether by force or by means that appear legitimate, inaccurate measurements of weight, size, or volume, fraudulent merchandising, the fine print. That's what it's talking about there. That's theft. Counterfeit money, excessive interest, or other means forbidden by God. We don't have the time here, but you should read this afternoon the Westminster Larger Catechism, question 142. It has a very lengthy list of the kind of things that are forbidden in this commandment, but it mentions these: stealing, theft, robbery, kidnapping, that's stealing, bribery, extortion, or vexatious lawsuits. Lawsuits are not in and of themselves impermissible, they're not sinful, but vexatious, lawsuits that go for everything and anything. That would be a form of stealing. I could call it legalized theft. We're thinking of any practice or behavior that cheats a customer or a provider of goods or services. Here's some forms of theft: intellectual theft. Plagiarism is theft. Infringements of copyrights or patent laws. Lying about a product's quality in order to get a better price for it. False measurements and weights, Leviticus 25. Injustice or unfaithfulness in contracts. So we have contract lawyers for this purpose. So, I mean, the wickedness of man is unparalleled. And so the ability of wicked man to find ways to pull the wool over a buyer or to write a contract in such a way that it's not a fair, or the person who signs it doesn't know what they're signing. Here's another form of stealing: preventing a person from earning a livelihood. Preventing him from being able to provide for his family. And so we see even there are some government, forms of government, I'm thinking of communism and socialism, that are really legalized forms of theft. You know, you think of Stalin and Lenin, you know, in terms of what they did to their people and all the people who just couldn't work honestly and make an honest wage. So those are forms of stealing that put an excessive burden on the worker. God forbade a person from taking the upper millstone in a pledge. Say, you owed me something, I'll take your millstone. Well, then you can't grind wheat. So preventing a person from grinding wheat would be a form of stealing. I'm not allowing him to be able to work, provide for his family. No one shall take a mill or an upper millstone in a pledge, for that would be taking in a life. I quoted that verse 2 weeks ago with regard to the sixth commandment, you shall not murder, right? So you see that a lot of these commandments, that's why James can say if you break one, you've broken them all. They are so intertwined that oftentimes when we talk about this, there's a lot of commandments that are coming into play. How about this? In certain situations, not all, but in some, and maybe in many, begging is stealing. When the beggar can get a job and is able to work. You look at the Bible, who are the beggars? They're blind and they're paralyzed. They can't work. So that would be a form of stealing. Be like, no, go get a job. Gambling would be a form of stealing. The unlawful acquisition of wealth. God here, we're going to look at some in a moment what's required, but God explains here is the right way to gain wealth. Work. Gambling would be an unrighteous way to gain wealth. Any kind of destruction or squandering of your employer's time, resources, equipment, including wastefulness, sloppiness, or vandalism. You know, showing up late for work and still getting paid for when you weren't even at work would be a form of stealing. Many of you have been employers or are employers, can testify to this form of theft. Employees that don't work hard and they treat your equipment, you know, it's a piece of junk. You know, that would be a form of theft. There's two aspects to stealing here in this next one. On the one hand, on the form of the employee, demanding unjust wages. Wages that would cripple your employer. And one of the beautiful things about capitalism is if you don't like your wage, go get another job or go get a second job. Capitalism is a beautiful thing. But in this way, not all, but some unions are basically organized theft, destroying the power of the employer to produce a product and give people a gainful form of living. So that's the one side of it, demanding unjust wages or benefits from your employer. But here's the other side of it from the employer's perspective, failing to pay your hired hand a fair wage, paying him peanuts when he deserves more for the work he does. Book of James. Behold, the wages which you kept back by fraud are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. God says, I am angry because you are not paying them a fair wage. So that would be, again, a form of theft. Could almost think here too in terms of many forms of slavery. Not all forms of slavery, but many would definitely fall in that category. Here's another interesting form of theft. You wouldn't think of this one, but this is going back to Old Testament times. But harvesting the corner of your field, or going back through the olive orchard a second time to make sure you didn't miss any olives, would be a form of theft. Because God said, no, I sent you the rain, I gave you the land, I gave you the strength to produce this. You get the first pickings, the poor get the second pickings. And God says in Leviticus 24 that what can be gleaned belonged to the poor. It did not belong to the owner. So to go back and glean that corner of the field, you were stealing from the poor. So see here, it says here, belong to the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. So, okay, how do we apply that in today's context? Well, that will take some thinking that through, right? We're going to get there in a moment. Treating your property or your possessions with contempt. That would be a form of stealing. God gave us all this stuff. You treat it with respect. Trash it. Now, we have to be careful that we don't go off the other side of this board and fall down and worship the stuff, right? And make an idol out of it. But we do need to treat our things with care, take care of the stuff that God has given us, because all these things belong to the Lord. So those are some of the sinful actions that are forbidden. What are some of the sins of the heart that are forbidden that lie beneath this? Oh, shoot, I had a few more here, but I just looked at my wrong page. Unmanageable debt. That would be a form of stealing. The wicked borrows and does not pay back. Psalm 37. So not all debt is sinful. God speaks in the Bible about manageable debt. You give aside your coat for the day, or you give a loan. God had rules about who you could charge interest to, who you couldn't charge interest to. So there were some parameters put around debt. Not all debt is sinful, but unmanageable debt is a form of stealing because it is an unstewardly use of one's money. Debt prevents you from helping others. Debt that prevents you from helping others is a misuse of the money that God has loaned to you. In some instances, not all, bankruptcy is a form of stealing. They loaned you money and you don't pay them back. Here's another form of stealing before we get to the sins of the heart. Not giving God your tithes and your offerings. Malachi chapter 3, God says, you have robbed me. How have we robbed you? Because you do not put your tithe in the collection plate. So you're stealing from God. The sins of the heart that lie at the root of this are the following: greed, Achan in the Old Testament, Judas in the New Testament, covetousness, which is idolatry, envy, jealousy, laziness, idleness, and unwillingness to work, and discontentment with God's will. Think of the forms of stealing that we've been thinking about, right? Why does a person steal? Well, a lot of times it's greed. That really lies at the root of it. Covetousness, envy, jealousy, laziness, etc. And really a discontentment with what God has ordained for us. All right, let's move on to better and brighter things. What is required here in this commandment? So we're going to look at some of the actions that are required and then the virtues. Again, we're looking at the biblical acquisition of wealth, possession of wealth, and the use of wealth. And first of all, when God says you shall not steal, what is he saying? He's saying you shall work. Don't grab that guy's pickup. Get a job, make some money, and buy your own pickup. Right? That's the idea. You shall work. Don't steal that man's bread. Go plant yourself a garden and make yourself bread. Go to the grocery store and buy some with the money that you've earned. So the first point, this commandment is requiring us to work. Work is a gift. Work is a blessing. That's the bullet point there for you to put in. In a general sense, work is a form of worship. What did God do to Adam after he made him? He made Adam and he said, Adam, I got a job for you. You're going to like this. Go and name all the animals in the garden. And then he says, I want you to till this garden. I want you to keep it. I want you to bring it to a greater sense of fulfillment. The word to keep there is to guard, to protect. But God was telling him, I want you to to nurture this garden and just bring it out, bring everything out, make it flourish, Adam. So Adam was a farmer. Work is a gift. Work is good. Stealing destroys the gift of work. So as we think about work here, we're thinking about hard work. We have a biblical work ethic that we speak about in the Bible. Ephesians 4:28, I think I have that there. Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. We think not all work that's commanded of us here is necessarily work that gets a paycheck. Moms, you obey this commandment when you keep house. You keep a clean house. You put food on the table, good food. When you take care of your children and see that they're properly clothed. That's work. I don't think anybody works harder than a mom, especially with the moms with little kids. That's work. So all the mothers are keeping this commandment, you shall not steal, when they work hard and take care of their children. Think of Proverbs 31. What a wonderful woman that woman is. She's industrious, intentional, skillful. She's wise. You can write right over Proverbs 31, this woman has kept the 8th commandment. You see why the 8th commandment is beautiful? You look at the Proverbs, you say, that is a beautiful woman. What an amazing, amazing woman. That's what we're thinking about here this morning. Providing for one's family is what is required of us here as well. I think of, let's go to 1 Thessalonians here for a moment. We don't have time to look at all the scriptures, but this is a good one. 2 Thessalonians. No doubt you guys have heard this passage. 2 Thessalonians. Chapter 3, verse 10. All right. For even when we were with you, we would give you this command, if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. For we hear that some among you walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busy bodies. Now such persons we command and encourage in the Lord Jesus Christ to do their work quietly and to earn their own living. So God here is commanding us to work. He's commanding us to work hard, to work intelligently, and to be able then to provide for our families. That would be the righteous attitude that we're speaking about here, or the righteous action that are required is that we work, and we work hard. Sometimes we even speak about a Protestant work ethic. Here's a second point. Not only work, but to have a righteous regard for property, a biblical understanding of possessions. It does not own us, we own it. You know, here if we had the time, we'd give the big Dave Ramsey speech. Your money does not own you. You own your money. It doesn't tell you what to do. You tell it where to go. You use it as a tool that God has given you. We put it to work. So even wisely investing your money in, as Dave Ramsey would say, high yield mutual funds, that's keeping the 8th commandment. Having an emergency fund for a rainy day is keeping the 8th commandment. Being able to just store up and save something for emergencies, that's keeping the 8th commandment. We are good stewards of what God has entrusted to us. A righteous regard for property rights, landmarks. As it's in the Old Testament, you can't move a landmark. You can't move that post, right? God says that property, that inheritance is yours. Ahab took Naboth's vineyard, and Ahab was going to die for it. So respect your neighbor's property, landmarks. Out here we have the phrase, good fences make good neighbors. Building fences is a way of obeying the 8th commandment. Putting up a good fence, then you have good neighbors. Helping your neighbor, protecting his property, protecting his possessions. If you see your neighbor's ox in a ditch, what are we to do? Go help him pull it out, even if it's our enemy. We say, we don't have oxes in the ditch anymore, but he might have a flat tire. I'll help you change your tire for you. So then as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, especially to those who are of the household of faith. So Those are some of the things. Have a righteous regard for your neighbor's property, possessions, and your own. Treat him with care, with respect. Don't trash what the Lord has given you, and make sure it doesn't own you, but you own it. So a lot of good stuff going on there. Providing for your family, working hard to provide. But let's look at the virtues that lie beneath these actions. One of the virtues I think that comes to the fore is the virtue of humility. Those who are gifted and skilled, not everybody is equally gifted or equally skilled in different kinds of labor and different kinds of ability, need to be humble. One person is an astronaut and the other is a plumber, and both need to be humble. Both need to be grateful for the gifts and abilities and talents God has given them. One person is healthy and can go out to work, and another person is not healthy and struggles to do any kind of physical labor. No, one is very, very bright. He's a chemist, and the other is not. Humility is what lies at the root of this commandment, that we would not steal, but we would be humble. We should not look down on pride upon others who cannot do what we do. Because we read in 1 Corinthians 4, who sees anything different in you? What do you have that you did not receive? If then you received it, why do you boast as if you did not receive it? So your intellectual abilities, your physical abilities, your talents, all of that, all that you have and all that you've achieved does not entitle you to be proud or to look upon somebody who doesn't have those gifts. Be humble. But even those who don't have those gifts should also be humble, that they don't look with covetousness and envy on those who have been gifted in that way. Here's also related to humility is a prayerfulness, a prayerful spirit. Listen to Deuteronomy 8. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your fathers as it is this day. So there's that humbleness saying, Lord, the fact that I can get up in the morning and go out to work is a gift you've given me. I thank you for that, because I know there are many who would love to work and they can't. Humility. Encouragement. You shall not steal. So, okay, we're thinking about labor, wealth. Encourage one another in their work. You see a brother or sister struggling, maybe they're not getting quite the pay raise that they were hoping, or it's just hard to make ends meet. Encourage, bless, come alongside of. Maybe they can't change the job for a particular reason. Well, you don't need to rain on their parade, but you can come beside them and encourage them. And maybe it's a difficult situation they can't change right now. Encourage, support, help. Contentment. Keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have, for he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Contentment. Generosity. That's a virtue. Don't steal, but give. So that would tie back to the whole, harvesting the corner of your field and the second time through the olive orchard. Be generous. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. The Philippians, even in their extreme poverty, were excessively generous. Don't steal, but give, as we read in Ephesians 4. Let the thief no longer steal, but do honest work so that he may have something to share. Caring for the poor. In all things I have shown you that by working hard in this way, we must help the weak and remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. So the eighth commandment commends generosity to each other and as resources permit to the poor. One other thing here, as we think about this eighth commandment, God gives us the power to get wealth. God gives wealth, therefore the enjoyment of wealth should be done without a sense of guilt. So where sometimes Christians go off on the other side of the rails here. If God has blessed you, enjoy what he's given you without guilt. The Bible speaks about the man being able to sit underneath the shade of his vine. We don't make those things idols. We don't bow down to them. They don't own us. But God has blessed you. Enjoy the blessings that God has given you, because God enjoys them. And then lastly, before we conclude this morning, is As we think about work, as we think about the virtues that support it and possessions, what also is key here is spiritual work. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it's God who works it in you, both to will and to do for his good pleasure. We are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God has prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Paul says, but by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace toward me was not in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that's in me. What we see here is a gospel-infused law. It says, I will work hard at my day job, but I will work harder on my soul to fight sin, pursue holiness, follow after Jesus, and be a Christian and a brother to all of you, right? That's what we're thinking about. That's what you guys are saying here. Lord, help me to work hard at my faith. Let's end with this. How did Jesus keep the 8th commandment? This is actually quite beautiful. Remember, the commandments reveal God. More specifically, the commandments reveal the Son of God who came as a man. So wonder of all wonders, the man who created the sun and all the stars, the one who spoke and there was light, is the one who became a man. And those hands that fashioned the stars are the hands that took the hammer and the nail, that took the saw, right? What was Jesus' first job? He was a carpenter. He worked hard, got slivers, probably cut his fingers now and then, had Band-Aids on them. He was a good student, a good apprentice. He could build sturdy furniture or buildings. Anybody here who works with their head or their hands can appreciate the fact that the Son of God has sanctified your labors. The Son of God has shown us that being a plumber or being a banker or being an astronaut, that whatever the vocation may be, or a homemaker, is labor that Christ himself has done, not those specific vocations, but he has shown us that labor has been sanctified by the Son of God, who worked with his own hands. There's a few kids here among us this morning, but what are the other works that Jesus did as a kid? He cleaned his bedroom. He picked up his toys. He took out the trash. Jesus was the most hard-working, cheerful-working, happy little boy in Joseph's home. So Jesus is an example for children how to work hard. Jesus worked very hard as he laid aside the hammer and the saw and took up the greatest work of his life, the work that the Father in heaven had given him to do. In terms of his ministry, he worked harder than any man would ever work. He was often completely and physically exhausted. Now, don't get me wrong. This commandment does not say we have to wear ourselves thin and burn the candle on both ends. It's not what we're saying here. Biblical acquisition of wealth means we also take care of our bodies so that we can work tomorrow and the next day after that. But nevertheless, the work on Jesus was an extremely arduous work. He worked himself so hard that he was often found in the boat, sailing to the other side of the sea just to get away from the crowd so he could have some respite, to get away and be refreshed. He needed refreshment. He was human. He was quite a hard-working man. He was spent. Satan tempted him one day to gain the whole world without working for it. Satan said, if you bow down to me, I'll give it all to you. Basically, Satan was encouraging Jesus to steal. It can all be yours without all the effort. But Jesus knew that the only way to gain dominion over the world was by doing the work that the Father had given him to do. He faithfully kept all God's commandments. That was work. Remember what we're saying as we look at the 10 Commandments? This is good work. Honoring your father and mother is a good work. It's a work. It takes work. Not murdering. That's loving your neighbor is work. These are good works. Jesus obeyed God's commandments perfectly, and those were works. And we call that in our Reformed theology active obedience. Now, when Jesus died, he gave you his works, his perfect cleaning of the bedroom, his perfect being the apprentice and learning how to do carpentry, his perfect submission to his Father's will in heaven, all that obedience is given to us, all that work as a gift, so that we are the best workers the Father has ever seen, because Christ's work is laid upon our own, replacing it. So Jesus Christ worked hard in terms of his active obedience, the key component of the righteousness that makes us worthy of heaven. But you know the greatest work he ever did was his cross work. Suffering for sin, atoning for sin, fighting Satan, laying down his life for us. We call that his passive obedience, because he was passive on the cross. It was done to him. But you see, there are works of Jesus, active and passive. But the greatest of all those works was his passive obedience. He did not steal the righteousness of angels. He worked. He suffered. By the sweat of his brow, which dropped like great drops of blood, with his own nail-pierced hands, he worked salvation for you and me. He still works. What's he doing now? Well, he is a king, and he's ruling. That's work. It takes effort. He is subduing sin and Satan beneath his footstool. He is a priest who is working. He's interceding, Father, for us. He is a prophet who works. He continues to speak. He continues to reveal his word, his truth to you and me. A prophet, priest, and a king who still works for us. Well, in the end, how does he keep the 8th commandment? Remember the story about the Good Shepherd in John chapter 10? Jesus talks about a thief. 8th commandment language. What does the thief do? He comes to steal. He comes to kill. And he comes to destroy. That's what thieves do. Satan comes to break the 8th commandment. And Jesus says, I came to keep the 8th commandment, because I will reclaim, and I will redeem, and I will retake what Satan has stolen. Satan sought to steal Adam and Eve, kidnap them from God. And Jesus says, I have come to take back what is God's. I have come to take back this world and say it's mine. I've come to redeem this creation. I think one of the most beautiful stories in terms of this analogy of stealing is the case of the demon-possessed man or the woman who had the debilitating disease. Are those not instances where Jesus comes to a creature whom Satan, the great thief, has stolen and has killed and destroyed? That man who is so demon-possessed, 12,000 demons lived within his soul. And Jesus liberates the man from the demons, and he takes that man back. And as it were, he gives him whole to the Father. A man with a clean spirit, clothed and in his right mind, as if Jesus says, Father, here's one for you. And I'm going to get more. I'm going to reclaim and redeem all that Satan has stolen, for it's yours. Creation groans for the return of the King, when he will retake even the animals and the forests and the plains and give it back entirely whole and pristine, a veritable paradise to God who made it. Jesus will keep the 8th commandment. Let's worship him together. Be thou my vision. We will have our role to play as we keep the 8th commandment. Let me give you a